All right. Well, welcome back to another week of Artificially Intelligent. Joining me are both of our co-hosts from last week, Jeff Chug and Alex Plotz. Guys, how you doing today?
Doing good.
Doing thumbs up. We're still
Doing
here.
thumbs up.
Yeah. If you thought we were just gonna go away and be quiet, you'd never hear from us again. Well, you're wrong because we're still here and more opinionated than ever.
Well, just reply "stop" in the comment section, and we'll make sure to take you guys off the distribution list. Anyway, so guys, today we're kind of dealing with a two-theme topic or set of topics. The first is really around transparency and what we've seen, the most recent news about the DSA over in Europe, as well as some of the most recent stuff coming out of OpenAI's camp from a privacy perspective. So I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I know much about either of them, but Jeff, why don't you kick us off just from a DSA perspective?
Yeah, so the DSA is something that, it is still not on a lot of people's radar because it hasn't gone into effect yet. It's an EU regulation, and so this is put out by the Parliament of the EU. They've been working on it for some time, releasing, sets of these rules. And then, of course, the rules will be implemented by individual EU member countries, right? So it's going to look a little bit different between France and Spain and Italy and so forth. But one of the things that this piece of regulation has is enhanced scrutiny and requirements for a class of businesses that are called very large.
I know this one. It's very large online platforms.
Very large online platforms. Thank you. They're called VLOPs. So you'll see it like in all the articles are just like VLOP, which is like the weirdest acronym that you could come up with. Why would you like VLOP it? Okay, that's fine.
It's very flattering, very figure flattering platforms.
But this is the big boys, right? The big tech giants with the big platforms. So the EU is saying, well, they're going to have tighter restrictions and regulations, and then what happened this week is they actually released the list of 19 companies that they consider to be VLOPs, very large platforms. So this is we now know who they are going to be, so that's good. Exactly what are the regulations going to shape up to look like? That's still unknown, but at least we know who the VLOPs are at this point.
And be interesting to understand, how they classify those, right? I mean, I think we were discussing before, the list makes sense. I mean, they are very large platforms, but in my mind, just looking through the list, it seems like there are some pretty large ones that seem to be missing. So it'd be interesting if they're going to release some of the criteria, or if we'll continue to see more companies being added to said list.
Yeah, I agree with that, Alex. And I would add to, one of the lines within this this news, story today was around the algorithmic, I guess, investigation or transparency requirements. For some of these, and I know you guys can go out and search the 19, but the ones that popped for me are like the Facebooks and the Instagrams, the LinkedIns, more of the social platforms. It'll be very interesting to kind of see what kind of information surfaces in terms of what they have to report on, specifically around like their advertising strategy, not to mention, how they're, I guess, following the rules from a GDPR perspective from data collection too. But, from your perspective, Jeff, anything else that we should be kind of keeping an eye on for this?
Yeah, so there's like this threshold that the EU has for determining who is and who is not a VLOP. And I think there are different components to it, but one of them is, do you have 45 million active users monthly, right? So monthly active users. So the really big platforms, how do they count that? I'm not sure exactly how they tally it up, but there's already talk about expanding the list to include others. Because you'll notice. Well, first off, the first thing I noticed is, well, almost all those companies that are identified as the 19 are US based, right? There's a few that are not, like Alibaba, AliExpress, TikTok, Zalando. But the other ones are US companies, and they are who you think they'd be, right? Facebook, Google, LinkedIn, Snapchat, which it makes sense. Those are the largest platforms, but it's interesting that the EU is passing laws that affect largely US based companies.
So in the spirit of trying to stay on time and not get cut off like we did in the first episode, Jeff, I wanted to also kind of cover, what we've seen out of the OpenAI camp that's happened in the last couple of days, especially around this opt-out policy as it comes to, the information that users can put in and essentially tell OpenAI not to use in terms of training their model. But from your perspective, what are some of the major hitting points of this kind of development?
Yeah, well, first off, when you, I think we've all used ChatGPT, right? And I'm curious, like, whether most people out there have used it, whether there's like a lot of people that, haven't used it yet, but it uses, every time you use that tool, the data that you put in, I think the questions that you write into it, it stores and uses it to train and refine the algorithm, right? Now, that's where this privacy concern comes from. Some people have been very vocal about the fact that OpenAI is storing and using the data they put into it. And that's why we see, for example, in Italy, like the regulators shut it down. You can't use GPT now in Italy, and that's what some of the regulation out there is meant to address. And this appears to be like a proactive measure from OpenAI to allay some of those concerns. And what it says is like, you can opt out, right? You can turn off your history, and if you do that, then we're not going to collect what you're putting into the tool, and it's not going to be used to train our models. So this was a pretty, one of the things that I thought about this is like, it's a pretty swift reaction to a concern that's really kind of been coming up only recently, only in the last a few weeks. And so, is it the right thing? Does it go far enough? I don't know, but at least they're showing some fast action here and responding to this quickly.
Yeah, I think the advantage though that OpenAI has is their revenue is not really generated from advertisement, right? Where the concern I think here is from these 19 companies, which their revenue predominantly is advertisement funds, right? And so if you start having large pools of your customer base no longer feeding into those things, what does that do for the advertisement? Do the companies still want to invest money into them to advertise on their platforms if their algorithms are no longer driving people to to their imagery or their sites or whatever? So I think it is cool, but I believe like OpenAI really has an advantage in that it doesn't infect their as much to what the money that they're making, right?
Yeah, the other thing is, OpenAI has already got an algorithm built. They've already got models built. They're really far ahead of the game here. So they have the first mover advantage in that, okay, well, if half the users turn off chat history, it probably won't affect their ability to further refine their models, right? Because they've already got it. They're already there. But you think about like, okay, well, what if this becomes the norm and the expectation? How would competitors get a model that's as good as GPT when nobody lets them use their data to train it, right? So now you're saying like, okay, well, this may be a huge advantage to OpenAI.
It's almost in the camp of go ahead and do it and ask for forgiveness later, right? To your point, OpenAI has already kind of done what they've needed to in order to train their model, and so at this point it's just kind of the cherry on top. But my mind also goes to some of the more, I guess we can call them legacy type platforms. Google comes to mind. From my recollection and understanding, nobody has really sounded the alarm in terms of like, hey, I don't want Google remembering what I'm searching. And if you do, like, there's very easy ways around it. But it's interesting to me that, for some of these more traditional search engines where, Alex, to your point, advertising certainly plays a role. they're much less vocal about, you know, what they're doing with your data. And at the same time, you know, it's kind of creepy. Like, you know, go and try this next time you're Googling something on Google. You know, start typing your question and see if the top 5 suggestions don't exactly mirror what you're about to what you're going to ask.
Or just talk about it around your phone, right? And next time you're on Instagram, it shows up magically, right?
Right. So I mean, I feel like this is always going to be kind of this ongoing move the stick or move the ball when it comes to the discussions around, you know, privacy at a user level, but then also, you know, ethics from, you know, what these technology and AI companies are utilizing the data for. And so, you know, I'm a proponent of, you know, the more transparency, the better, as we're kind of seeing over in Europe, as well as, you know, handing privacy rights back to, you know, users here in the US and really globally. But ultimately, you know, I would argue that it also comes down to the end user to be smart enough to understand what they should or should not be putting into these platforms as well.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious to be if they start mandating right now, you have to start sharing some of this. Who's going to review it? You know what I mean? Like, is it the regulators? Like, I mean, do they have what's necessary to dissect some of these AI engines and really understand what's going on, and what value does that add? You know what I mean? Is it to offer it up to competitors? Is it, you know, to, you know, I think it's just going to be interesting if they're asking for some of this, who's reviewing it? You know what I mean? So it's going to be interesting to see how it, you know, folds out. And I know this is just the kind of the first release, right? And, you know, to Jeff's point, some of these countries will interpret it, you know, their own way and implement things a little bit differently, but it's going to be interesting to see how it unfolds.
Yeah, well, it's you know, one of the things that you can compare this, the DSA, you know, you can look back a few years to see GDPR and see exactly the confusion and the you know, the lengths that companies went to try and comply with that regulation, and how there's a lot of ambiguity still years afterwards. Like, this is, you know, I think I read somewhere like that someone called this GDPR and steroids. And we'll see what happens. I think that there's you know, one class of people that definitely benefits from ambiguity and regulation, and that's the lawyers, right? And so if anything, privacy lawyers have just received a big gift from the EU Parliament here, and ought to be very busy in the years to come.
Well, it makes sense, and the timing is great because from what I've heard, you know, AI is essentially taking over the courtroom, or trying to anyway. So, you know, you got to give these lawyers something to do.
Yeah, but you know, it is interesting though, because, you know, on the list of the 19 VLOPs, you know, there are the big, you know, Google's on there a few times, Facebook's on there, but Wikipedia is also on there, right? Wikipedia, do they have the resources to do all these compliance activities? You know, that it would be tough. And if they add to the list, you know, these companies, even though they're big, they don't have infinite resources. So I wonder if any of them will just say, you know what, we're just not going to be available in the EU. We're just going to shut off that part. We'll see.
Yeah, so to be continued on that. You know, great set of topics this week, boys. You know, for everybody that's been following us around, or at least keeping up with what we're doing here, keep an eye out for, you know, our next segment, which will be releasing next week. We're always looking for suggestions. We're always looking for folks that are interested in kind of directing the conversation where we go next. So please like, share, and comment, so that way we have something to talk about. And so we're not just up here just making stuff up and pulling it out of you know where. But guys, thanks again for joining us this week, and we'll see you next week.
Yep, and we'll cover everything, right, Joe? So we play total football with these topics, right?
That's absolutely right. I challenge somebody to give us a topic that we can't cover for at least a minute.
Taylor Swift next, right, Joe?
That's right. Please, guys, give us something else before I have to resort to that.